Our study of ancient Mesopotamia continues with our next groups of people we're going to discuss today with the Akkadians, Indo-Europeans, and Hittites. We finished off in our last lecture talking about the Sumerian city-states, and as they've grown into their civilization and as their culture has developed and as they're trading amongst each other for the various small resources in the area, led to nearly constant fighting. And what we see for nearly 1,000 years, from 3000 to about 2000 BC, these various Sumerian city-states are all fighting amongst each other for the limited resources of the area. And what we see is because of this state of near constant fighting, that eventually the result of that is the weakening of all the Sumerian city-states to fight off invaders. And what we see is the first of a series, and this is why this unit we're talking about on our peoples of Mesopotamia chart, 6 different peoples coming into the area, because as we saw in our map of Mesopotamia that we did for homework, there's very few natural barriers geographically in Mesopotamia. It's basically a big giant flat plain. So we're going to start here with today. We saw the Sumerian peoples kind of rise up and quote native people, and that's a very much loaded term, end quote. Going to be attacked, and we'll see various wave of invasions, and we'll see one after another of people invading into the area, settle down, only to be invaded themselves. The first group of people we want to talk about are the Akkadians, and they're going to be led by a man called Sargon of Akkad. And by 2350 BC, Sargon is begin to expand his domain to take over land stretching from the Mediterranean Sea all the way to modern-day Iran. And what he's creating is what historians dub the First Empire. An empire is the bringing together of several peoples, nations, or independent states under one control. And the big thing that Sargon was able to do, that we don't very see in the historical record up until this point, is to be able to conquer not just a neighboring tribe or a neighboring town or neighboring peoples, but then subsequently keep adding more and more people to where we get this idea of an empire today, of multicultural people being ruled, in this case, by a single ruler. So Sargon, in his expansion of the Akkadians, is going to help not only conquer this area where the Sumerian culture has gone, but the Akkadians be one of the early examples that we've seen so far as a truly warlike people, where they're spending most of their time in the pursuits of perfecting the martial arts and in fighting. They're going to go to these places and read Gilgamesh. They're going to read the cuneiform tablets, and they're going to see that there's more out there. And as they go and spread in their military conquest, they're going to take the Sumerian culture along with them. And that's going to have a big impact in the region long after the Akkadians are gone. With the expansion of the Akkadians, the Akkadian becomes almost a lingua franca, a common language throughout Mesopotamia for the next nearly 1,300,000 years. If you might not be able to have your local dialect be understood in a market or between two people, but you might be able to do a little bit of a pidgin or a rough Akkadian to be able to go and talk. And we'll see that this is one of the long-lasting legacies of the Akkadians. Even though they only last for about 200 years, the spreading of Sumerian culture and their language being a way to communicate through the old Akkadian Empire gives kind of a lasting legacy from the people that aren't there. And as you can see from what's dubbed the Mask of Sargon, which might not actually be himself, but maybe one of his relatives, you can see that some people didn't exactly like being ruled by an empire. And you can kind of see the damage that are done there. But that's what we see. So with Sargon, we see things like this where you've got the inscription here where he's going and describing his conquest, and we see the expansion that he has from the Mediterranean down through the Mesopotamia proper, all the way over into places like modern-day Iran today. And again, we get different things as well. We get from the Akkadians, we have this recipe from beet broth that we get right from them. And again, that's due to being able to write things down in cuneiform, be able to, again, spread their culture even into our times today. We saw the Akkadians taken over. All right, they're going to be taken over in about 2000 BC by a group of nomadic Amorites invading into Mesopotamia. They're going to establish their capital at Babylon, and they're going to give from their city the name, or the historians give them, of the Babylonians. Now, we're again doing real broad strokes for this time period, but the Babylonian Empire is going to reach its peak under the ruler of Hammurabi. He's important for a variety of different things, but he's most important for his Code of Hammurabi. And the Code of Hammurabi was his single uniform code of laws for his entire Babylonian Empire. This was engraved in stone around 760 BC, and not just one set of engravings. These then were carved on nearly 6 foot tall granite pillars spread throughout the empire, put at major crossroads. So if me and say my brother got into an argument that escalated more than something that we could go and figure out, I'm accusing him of that, he's accusing me, we could go to this granite pillar, we could go read the different law and then be able to understand where we can go from there to kind of, again, let everybody know what the law is. The Code of Hammurabi itself is 282 specific laws that affected the community, and we'll do a activity in class that very much works through with the Code of Hammurabi. We'll read the actual laws and see how it does get down to very specifics where it could be one action, but because there's a rich person now involved or a woman now involved, there'll be different punishments based on, say, if you're rich or poor or man or woman, and that's why we get these very specific laws where again it might be 3 or 4 laws dealing with the same action, but there's different consequences for that action based upon there. The big takeaway is, and what we'll see on our final exam, what we'll see on our quiz, is that each and every one of these laws is based around the retaliation principle. And this can very much be summed up as an eye for an eye. You gouge out my eye, I then, according to kind of the underlying principle of the Code of Hammurabi, get to gouge your eye out as well. And this very much becomes something we see in a lot of law codes from this time period moving forward, in that if something happens to someone else, that someone else, that person is then able to reciprocate and have that action be done against them. You get to retaliate for the action done against you. And that's one of the big things that we see with Hammurabi. And again, we ask, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? This is very much the idea of deterrence. I'm going to deter thieves from stealing by very much making an example of them by cutting off their hands. I'm going to deter people from gouging out eyes, right, by then gouging their eyes out. So it very much is this idea of I'm not going to do an action because I don't want that then action retaliated against me. Right? It's deterring me from doing that. But again, there's also the proverb of an eye for an eye makes the world blind. Again, we get moved as we get into more recent time periods. Again, if you shift 2,000 years, it only gets to the time of Jesus. Jesus family says, "A man strikes you, turn the other cheek," and that's very much a reaction to these type of laws that we see here. That again, what makes something so revolutionary about the thinking of that time period. So something to go and think about: is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? It maybe it's more of a personal opinion, value judgment, but that's the idea that's being drawn behind it. The other big thing, to a lesser extent, that the Code of Hammurabi shows is that this is an example, and it's one of the first examples, but it's a big one, of reinforcing principle that now government has the responsibility for what occurred in society. We're not praying to gods, we're not having spirits decide what's going on. The government will go in. Something has wronged me, I have been wronged, I go to the government to have that try to be fixed, to have a action taken on my behalf. So that's very much a shift of what we've seen as we move through these lectures, from very much starting off with the Sumerian city-states being ruled by these temple priests, then with this stage of warfare, this fighting, and now we've got warriors in charge. The warriors are leading governments, and now what can that government provide that we haven't seen before? And in this case, the Code of Hammurabi backs up this idea and drives forward that the government has a responsibility to help people out, or at least very much provide guidance, provide the kind of the guardrails to what someone can and can't do in society. So again, we're just very much just picking out the Babylonians and picking one little thing here. But again, Babylon at the time of Hammurabi is centered around here. Again, Baghdad is relatively in the same area today, and again, taking over much of the southern middle Mesopotamia that they have. That's Hammurabi seated. As you see one thing here, and again, he's famous for his Code of Hammurabi. So that's written on a small cuneiform tablet here. This is just a selection of those jaws. But again, this picture doesn't really do it justice. This is a 6 foot tall granite pillar that lists out all 282 laws. So you can go and say, hey, this person did something to me, and now Hammurabi, the government, is then going to use those laws in their ability to then go and say, well, then this happens to them back, or this action is taken against you. Moving on, and this the book doesn't make it easy here. We're kind of jumping around, but we're moving quickly through history. It's kind of episodic here. But our next group of people we want to talk about are nomadic people from the steppes called the Indo-Europeans. The Indo-Europeans are a group of nomadic peoples who may have come from the steppes north of the Caucasus Mountains. The Caucasus Mountains are in southern modern-day Russia, northern China, Afghanistan, the Kazakhstans, those areas. We kind of think of the Caucasus Mountains as very much a geographic and a quote-unquote barrier that kind of separates between northern Europe, Russia, and then also Asia on the southern part of it. The steppes are dry grasslands north of the Caucasus, and when you picture the steppes, these basically go from the Urals in the west, and you can again make the case that these go all the way almost to eastern Poland, all the way to the Pacific Ocean in the south. This is a literal ocean of grass. So there's more land area taken up by the steppes than there is by the Atlantic Ocean. Right? This is a giant, vast plain of pretty much nothing. So it makes sense that the people that live there are going to be a pastoral people. They're going to make their living, they're going to show their wealth in the livestock that they're able to herd, the cattle, the sheep, the goats that they have, as well as being one of the first peoples to tame horses. And from their tamed horses, they're going to be able to use this in their military formations, and they invent and then use chariots in battle. So as they begin to migrate in other places, they're bringing with them other just ideas and technologies, and one of those that we see are chariots. Now, for whatever reason, again, we'll see this a couple of different times throughout history. We'll see pulses of people coming off of these grasslands, and it's still hard each and every time for why at this moment in time or that moment in time or this point in history that a group moves off the steppes. But for this time period, we don't exactly know why they moved. Climate change, a change in society, a governmental change, a shift in perspective moving up. But for whatever reason, the Indo-Europeans move out of these places and migrate to another place. And you know that a migration is a movement from one people, of a people from one region to another. So I go to vacation in Disneyland, that's not a migration, that's just a vacation. And migration is moving, again, when we're looking for one region of the earth. It's not moving from, like I just moved 5 minutes up the road from a townhouse to my house. It's not really a migration. If I'm moving, say, from New York to Los Angeles, or I'm moving from, say, Los Angeles to, I don't know, Adelaide, Australia, that's much more of a migration. And again, think of it more in terms of human context, people's a people, not just Mr. Cranmer or a singular student. So what we see here is the steps here of this. And again, the steps kind of really stretch all the way over to here. So from the steps, we begin to go and see, pull up the laser pointer so you can see. So the steps stretching that way. It's going down into these different places, and it'll eventually go all the way into Western Europe, down into, we'll talk about groups into Mesopotamia. Now, why the Indo-Europeans are important is because their language becomes an ancestor to many modern day languages spoken today. So the idea of how are these people impacting our lives in 2024 today is that languages like English, Spanish, Persian, Hindi, as disparate, as different sounding to, say, an English speaker's ear as these different languages are, they all have their roots in the Indo-European migrations. And what we can do from a people that very much left little in the archaeological record and physically and didn't really write a whole lot of things down, we can use the languages that are modern descendants and can tell where tribes migrated to and settled by studying these language groups and the evolutions of similar words. Therefore, we can actually reverse modern languages, work our way back, peel the history pages back to find out about the culture and life of these early Indo-Europeans. So for a people that don't show up very much physically in the archaeological record, don't have a whole lot of stuff written down, we actually can learn a lot about their lives by looking at modern day languages, say English, working back to Middle English, then Old English, then subsequent language to where we can get, and linguists, historians, scholars have actually reverse engineered and created a Proto-Indo-European language with the proper pronunciations for a language that has not been on the earth for thousands of years. So some of the things that we know that very much show up in a lot of these different cultures and these languages that are around today, in these very different places around the globe that they are, is that we know that the Indo-Europeans like to divide things in threes. Think about how your day is divided into three, morning, noon, and night. How you like to go, usually people eat 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If I go to a traffic light, okay, I see red, yellow, green. If I'm going to race you in a race, okay, you're going to count me off by saying ready, set, go, or 1, 2, 3. Okay, if I don't want to race because I'm tired, I'm going to try to beat you playing rock, paper, scissors. All those are divided into threes, and we see that come up again and again and again in a lot of different cultures. We know that the Indo-Europeans had cows and dogs because the cow word for cow and dog is very similar as we work through these different languages. Now, a English word for dog is going to be very different from a Spanish word for dog, but as we work our way back through history and the language trees, those words become closer and closer to where you can actually find a common ancestor word for all those Indo-European languages. Therefore, we know they had no tigers and monkeys. Follow the logic here. There are no tigers and monkeys on the steppes, so the Indo-Europeans would not have a language for them. As these different groups of Indo-Europeans spread out in the Middle East, Asia, and Europe, they didn't encounter those until one group came and found, say, a tiger in modern day India. They then had to create a word to describe that, and they would not have or had hard contact with other groups of Indo-Europeans, so that word would not have would be different. So it's very much instead of being close on the family tree of languages, it's far out in the far branches. So that's how we're able to understand kind of where they're coming from geographically, just based on language. We know they had ships because of the common word that we can reverse engineer for ship, but there's no common word for ocean, meaning they didn't have a concept of that themselves, and they only came about it as those different tribes of Indo-Europeans migrated. So we can talk about modern day languages belonging to the Indo-European language family group. So we can do this very much around the globe, look at different family language groups, but the different colors on this map very much show the where the Indo-Europeans went and settled and where they came from. We can also then look in this map and see places like Hungary stands out very much, right, as a non-Indo-European language. Well, that's because the people of Hungary, right, are founded by the Magyars a couple thousand years later, who are another later group of people coming from the steppes and settling later, and so their language is very different. Okay, Austria is sort of similar to Slovenians, Czech, Slovakia is somewhat similar a little bit, right? But it's vastly different walking from Austria to Hungary in terms of linguistics and language. So we can go and see, and again, it's far different sounding to say a freshman in America's ear is as Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, Dutch, English, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, Urdu, Hindi, Bengali, Punjabi, Kurdish, Persian, as different soundings as all these languages are, as we work our way back, they actually all come from a very similar, same starting point in the Indo-Europeans. And that's the effect that these people have on us today, to where we can go and we can see, again, as different sounding as do, do, dwa, tavir, do, twa, no, dis, zwei, tu, and I can keep going as I butcher all these ones. We work our way back. The number two has its context in a Proto-Indo-European language. So we can go and we can see and count in English 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and see how similar, right? We usually say 6 looks pretty similar across the board, 8 looks pretty similar. We can see how similar these Indo-European language families are versus a non-Indo-European language, Japanese. So look how very different the Japanese 1 through 10 linguistically are versus, say, some of the other languages that are closer related. We can do that for other words too, where again, we can look and see how words across these very disparate sounding languages today have their roots in an Indo-European language word that they came up with. And this is how those pesky eighth graders at ESPN2 in May with their spelling bee skills are able to understand kind of how these words because you don't really need to memorize all the words in the dictionary. You can very much be successful as a speller if you understand word origins and how words have developed. So as different sounding as technology, tissue, text, architect, tectonic, and dachshund is to us, as you work our way back through the different language trees, you can get back to this idea of a Proto-Indo-European language. And this word dachshund is related to the word text to weave because from to weave it becomes builder, right? It becomes badger, right? And then a badger hound is a dachshund. Dachshunds are bred to be long and skinny to go into badger dens and fight the badgers in the darkness of the den. And then if that dog gets in trouble, you can use and yank it out. You don't have to get your hand in there. Right? Dachshunds are mean. Dachshunds put more Americans in hospitals and emergency rooms every year than any other dog breed because they're bred to fight badgers. And we can know that by working our way through the different language hierarchies here. And again, we could do this for all these different languages and work our way through. And here's another example of, again, we can see all the different English words at the bottom, as different as tennis is from hypotenuse, they all have the Indo-European kind of base in which to stretch. The third group we want to talk about today and our next group of people are one of these Indo-Europeans. So in 2000 BC, a group of Indo-Europeans is going to move into the area called Anatolia. Now, Anatolia is also sometimes referred to as Asia Minor, and this is a giant peninsula that juts out into the Black and Mediterranean seas. A little bit of modern-day Armenia, a lot of modern-day Turkey is what makes up Anatolia today, and this is a resource-heavy area that's a high plateau with timber, agriculture, and we're going to come back to this idea of mineral deposits in a second. And the group of Indo-Europeans is going to work there. They're going to be fine, having fun. And in 1650, these different groups of Indo-Europeans in Anatolia are going to coalesce and come together to form the Hittite city-states and the Hittite Empire. This group of people is going to be around for a long time. They're going to dominate Southwest Asia for over 450 years. So think about the modern United States only goes back to 1789. Right? We just had our bicentennial. We're almost like 250 years old here. This is 200 years longer than the United States has been around. So that's what we go and we see is barrier. They captured and occupied Babylon, right, as they went and expanded their empire down into the Mesopotamia, and we see them picking up on other ideas that people before adopted Akkadian for national language use, and very much borrowed ideas from other Mesopotamian peoples. Not as kind of whole cloth as the Akkadians did, but very much kind of absorbing, and we go back to this idea of cultural diffusion of different ideas and actions that other groups that we've talked about before have in. So Indo-Europeans very much come from the steppes. One group of Indo-Europeans settles in Anatolia, which is this area here, and from there they begin to set up the Hittite city-states. And so all these different city-states over time by 1650 BC are going to go and establish at Hattusa, their capital, and then begin to go on the warpath and begin to go and expand. Hattusa, the remnants and ruins are still around today. This is an artist's conception of what it looked at, the height of its power. It's known for its walls, but you can go there and you can see the different decorations and some of the stuff on the walls that the Hittites have left for us. A lot of lions is a common motif we see in Hittite artwork and throughout there. But again, we also see cherubim like we see in other groups of Indo-Europeans and peoples from Mesopotamia as well. Now, the Hittites are another warlike people, and they very much excelled in the technology of war, which gives them an advantage on the battlefield that they're able to exploit. Now, the two things that the Hittites have that gives them an advantage are one, chariots. And we saw that the Indo-Europeans developed chariots on the steppes, so it shouldn't really surprise you that a group of Indo-Europeans is in the Hittites is then using that to do. Chariots are light, easy to maneuver, and it very much gives you an advantage on the battlefield where you are now running at the speed of a horse and you are not doing the running yourself. You can have your horses run around circles and then get off and your legs are still fresh. Very simple device, and we'll show you pictures if we're not familiar, but again, think of a T, right? The long part of the T has horses hitched on either side. The cross part of the T, you build a floor, you build some frames out, and now you can stand, and again, you can move on the wheels that are at either end. And so you can literally run circles around other people in the battlefield, particularly if you have chariots and they don't. It gives you a platform from which to move from, and again, it very much allows you to move quickly at a speed faster than what normal humans can do. The second major technology they have is iron. So they are able to have the production and creation of iron weapons, which other groups don't have. Now, iron, the material itself, is much stronger than bronze. Iron is its own atom. It's its own iron exists there. So that the bronze is an amalgamation. You've got to dig copper up, you've got to dig tin up, you've got to go and mix it together. And so that becomes the idea. Now I can give you a bronze shovel to dig a hole, and I can give you an iron shovel to dig a hole. But after digging one hole with my bronze shovel, you're then going to have to go and sharpen it and make it better, fix it back up. It's another, where iron you can keep going. So if it's better digging holes, imagine what it can do in chopping heads off. It very much has a much sharper edge. It can hold that edge and is a lot stronger of a material. The issue is that it's a much more complex process. Even though you're only dealing with iron rather than two metals, right? You've got to be able, it's much more microscopic in how it's coming out of the earth, so you got to be able to separate it out from the earth a lot harder. And then again, you got to heat it up to much higher temperatures. And so because the Hittites are the first in Southwest Asia to master it, that gives them an advantage on the battlefield that we don't see others peoples get until they're able to either steal or have that technology come to them and then use that. So they're using that iron to make weapons of war as well as tools, and chariots and iron weapons very much allow the Hittites to dominate Southwest Asia, Mesopotamia for as long as they do. Until, right, should be a common refrain here for this series of lectures, 1190 BC, they're attacked from outside invaders, their empire falls, their capital is burned, they move on into the history books, and we move on to a different people. But like we said, and we want to emphasize this point, hints and winks and nudges thrown around here, it's the chariots. Okay, again, we think of our T, cross part of the T with the wheels on it, long part of the T between two horses. And again, the bigger the platform you have allows for more people to be on there. But again, allows you to literally move around on the battlefield to allow you to use your iron weapons. You can see a variety of them up here, and here's a big longer sword to give you an advantage. And that's what allows the Hittites to be in this area this dominant for so long. But like we've seen, they're going to move on. And like the Hittites, we're going to be moving on into our next groups of people with our next lecture.